Picture this. The year is 1520.
Okay, seven the scene.
Yeah. We are at the freezing, wind-battered bottom of the world, just anchored in this really bleak natural harbor called Puerto San Julian.
Sounds lovely.
Oh, it gets worse. Ferdinand Magellan, the legendary explorer, he has parked his Spanish fleet there for a brutal winter. His men are starving. They are completely ravaged by scurvy, and they are actively plotting a mutiny.
Right, the tension on those wooden ships must have been just suffocating.
Absolutely suffocating. And what is Magellan doing to pass the time while his whole expedition is basically falling apart?
Hiding?
Yes. He is hiding in his cabin, reading his favorite fantasy novel.
I love this detail so much.
It's amazing. It's a Spanish chivalric romance published a few years earlier, around 1512, I think. It's called Promelium.
It really is such a wonderfully absurd historical image. It is, it's basically the 16th century equivalent of being snowed in during a massive crisis and just completely ignoring the real world to binge read a high fantasy paperback.
Exactly. Like ignoring your problems with a dragon book.
Right, because chivalric romances, they were essentially the superhero movies of their day. They were just full of knights and wizards and these really bizarre monsters.
So Magellan is sitting there, probably shivering under a heavy cloak, right? Just completely immersed in this fictional world. And one day, he looks out onto the desolate shoreline and spots a local indigenous man.
Just out in the cold.
Yeah, thriving in it. This man is dressed in heavy layered animal skins, completely surviving in an environment that currently has Magellan's own hardened sailors on the absolute brink of death.
Which is wild to think about.
It is. And Magellan, who is just completely influenced by the fantasy world he's been reading about all winter, decides to name this local after a creature from his novel.
Oh, literal monster.
Right. A raw meat-eating, dog-faced monster named the Patagon.
And that moment, I mean, it is just a profound example of life imitating art, or rather, human projection imitating art.
Oh.
Because of that single, highly subjective literary reference from a really stressed-out explorer, this incredible myth was born. For the next 250 years, the educated classes of Europe would be utterly convinced that the southern tip of South America was inhabited by a literal race of 12-foot giants.
12 feet tall. I mean, that story isn't just a quirky historical footnote. It perfectly captures what Patagonia has always been to the rest of the world. It's basically a blank canvas for human projection.
It really is.
And welcome to you, the listener, to our deep dive. Today, our mission is to explore the real, untamed, deeply fascinating geographical region of Patagonia.
And just to clarify, we aren't talking about the popular outdoor clothing brand.
Right. No fleece jackets today. We are looking at the massive, highly contested territory the brand is named after. It's an area spanning the deep southern reaches of both Argentina and Chile.
And to set the stage for you physically, for the listener, this is fundamentally a land of extremes.
Extremes in every sense.
Absolutely. If you stand on the western side over in Chile, you are surrounded by jagged fjords, dense temperate rainforests, and these towering blue glaciers that just crash right into the sea.
It sounds beautiful.
Oh, it is. But then, if you cross the mountains to the east, into Argentina, the environment violently shifts. It turns into these arid, wind-blasted steppes and endless tablelands stretching all the way to the Atlantic Ocean.
It's a landscape that almost defies logic, honestly. And the reason this geography matters to you, to all of us listening, is that this extreme environment has forced some truly extreme adaptations.
From everything. From the creatures that lived there millions of years ago to the humans who fight over it today.
Exactly. It is a place that has hosted prehistoric megafauna, legendary outlaw republics, brutal state-sponsored military conquests, and today, even modern-day billionaire land grabs.
It acts as a mirror, really, for whatever humanity is trying to achieve or exploit at any given moment in history.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the physical ground we're standing on, well, the deep time mystery of Patagonia is just as wild as the human history.
It really is. When you look at the geology of this place, it's basically a puzzle piece that refuses to fit cleanly into the rest of the continent.
Right. The rocks don't match.
Exactly. The geological reality of Patagonia is defined by a massive structural discontinuity. Geologists know it as the Huincal Fault.
The Huincal Fault, okay.
And for context, most geologists and historians use this specific fault line as the true physical northern boundary of Chilean Patagonia.
So it's a literal line in the dirt.
Very much so. But what makes the Huincal Fault so critical to understand is that the ages and the types of the base rocks beneath the soil, they change completely. and abruptly, the moment you cross it.
Wow. I'm trying to picture this. Is it like a visible seam in the earth? Like a bad weld in a ship's hull where two totally incompatible metals have just been forced together?
That is a brilliant analogy. Yes, it behaves exactly like a bad weld.
That's wild.
It is. When geologists analyze the rock formations north of the Tehuelche Fault, they see typical South American continental crust. But when they cross south into Patagonia, the geochemical signatures change entirely.
They just don't belong there.
Right. And this anomaly has led to some of the most heated debates in modern geology. There are essentially two major competing theories about how the Patagonian landmass even came to exist where it is.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first theory was famously proposed by the Argentine geologist Victor Ramos. He suggests that Patagonia originated as what we call an allochthonous terrain.
Hold on, let's break down that terminology. Allochthonous terrain. That essentially means what? An alien landmass? Like something that migrated from somewhere else?
Yes, exactly. In plate tectonics, a terrain is a fragment of crustal material that formed on or broke off from one tectonic plate, and then it accreted or attached to crust lying on another plate.
So it drifted.
Right.
Okay.
Ramos's theory suggests that Patagonia was originally attached to Antarctica.
Antarctica.
Yeah. The hypothesis is that it broke off, drifted across the ancient ocean, and literally crashed into and docked with the southern margin of South America. This would have happened around 250 to 270 million years ago during the Permian period.
Wait, think about the mechanics of that for a second. Are you saying Patagonia itself might be an immigrant? Like a geological Frankenstein's monster stitched onto the bottom of South America after drifting across a prehistoric sea?
That is exactly the premise of the debate. It suggests that the Tehuelche Fault is the literal collision zone. It's the scar tissue of that ancient continental impact.
That is mind-blowing.
It is. Now, it is crucial to note that not everyone agrees with this.
Sure, science is all about debate.
Exactly. Other geologists, heavily supported by a comprehensive 2014 study led by R.J. Pankhurst, strongly reject this far-traveled alien idea. They argue for a paratoconous origin.
Paratoconous, meaning it was always in the neighborhood.
Correct. The paratoconous theory argues that the Patagonian landmass was always relatively nearby, maybe slightly shifted or stretched over millions of years by tectonic forces, but it never broke off from Antarctica and drifted across an ocean.
Okay, so it's always basically attached, just squished around a bit?
Pretty much. They point to paleomagnetic data and specific isotope signatures that suggest Patagonia developed in tandem with the rest of southwestern Gondwana.
Right.
But regardless of whether it drifted thousands of miles or just shifted next door, the fossil record locked inside this bizarre rock proves some mind-bending ancient global connections.
Oh, the fossils. The fossils we're talking about are incredible. I mean, when you look at the paleontology of this region, you start seeing creatures that, geographically speaking, just shouldn't be there.
Absolutely.
The one that absolutely blows my mind is the Nyalomia. Let's talk about the turtle.
Oh, the turtle is fantastic. The Nyalomia is a prehistoric horned turtle. It's a member of the extinct family Melanidae, and it was found in the Sarmiento Formation in Patagonia.
And it has horns.
Yes. But what is staggering about this specific turtle fossil is its comparative anatomy. When paleontologists assembled the Nyalomia, they realized it was almost perfectly identical to a Pleistocene-era fossil found half a world away.
Wait, where?
In Queensland, Australia,
Ugh.
a turtle named Nijmezowini.
That is insane. A heavily armored horned turtle in the deserts of Argentina is the biological twin of a turtle buried in Australia.
It really is. It is one of the most elegant pieces of biological evidence we have for the ancient supercontinent of Gondwana.
Because they used to be connected.
Exactly. Millions of years ago, South America, Antarctica, and Australia were fused together. The ancestors of these turtles roamed across a completely continuous landmass.
Wow.
And when tectonic forces finally ripped the supercontinent apart, the populations were isolated on different continents. But their fossilized remains tell the story of time when you could literally walk from Patagonia to Queensland.
And it isn't just turtles down there either. The Mesozoic and Cenozoic deposits here are astonishing in their sheer scale.
Dinosaurs.
Yeah. We are talking about the mid-Cretaceous Argentinosaurus. Paleontologists believe this might be the largest, heaviest dinosaur to ever walk the surface of the Earth.
It's almost incomprehensible how big they were.
Imagine a creature nearly 100 feet long, weighing up to 70 tons, just moving across this landscape. And you also have the mid-Jurassic Piatnitskysaurus, which was this massive bipedal apex predator.
Like a T-Rex kind of deal.
Yeah, exactly. They actually put a full-scale skeletal model of one in the concourse of the Trileu airport in Argentina.
Really?
Yeah. You get off your commercial flight, grab your bags, and just come face to face with a Jurassic nightmare.
That is amazing. It perfectly captures the spirit of the region. But, as we discussed earlier, it is not just the rocks and the ancient bones that define Patagonia. It is the active, modern climate.
Right, the extreme weather.
You mentioned the extreme divide between the wet west and the dry east. This isn't just a random weather pattern. It is a mechanical process driven by the Andes Mountains, which act as a brutal, towering dividing line.
Let's explain how that weather machine actually works, because it shapes literally everything about human and animal survival here.
Okay, so the process is called orographic lift. And in Patagonia, it operates on a terrifying scale. Westerly winds are constantly blowing off the Pacific Ocean, carrying massive amounts of moisture.
Just soaked air.
Right. When these heavy, wet weather systems hit the western slopes of the Chilean Andes, the air is violently forced upwards by the mountain.
It has nowhere else to go.
Exactly. And as the air rises, it cools rapidly. Cold air cannot hold as much moisture as warm air, so it condenses and unleashes a staggering amount of rain and snow.
And when we say a staggering amount, we mean annual precipitation ranging from 4,000 millimeters up to 7,000 millimeters in some local microclimates.
Which is huge.
It is. 7,000 millimeters is over 275 inches of rain a year. It is basically a perpetual, freezing wash cycle that fuels the largest contiguous ice fields in the southern hemisphere outside of Antarctica.
But then what happens when that air finally makes it over the mountain peak?
It just stops.
The climate simply shuts off. By the time the air crests the Andes and begins its descent down the eastern slopes into Argentina, it has been squeezed entirely dry.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. As it drops in elevation, it warms up slightly, creating an intense parching effect. This is what we call the rain shadow. You move into the Patagonian steppe, and the precipitation plummets to less than 800 millimeters in the foothills and down to an astonishingly low 200 millimeters on the eastern plains.
It's like a desert.
It really is. It transforms into a dry, shingle-covered plateau, dropping in 13 abrupt terraces toward the Atlantic Ocean.
To give you, the listener, a visceral sense of what this weather actually feels like, consider the city of Balmaceda.
Oh, Balmaceda is a great example.
Yeah, it's uniquely situated. It is technically in Chilean territory, but it sits on the eastern side of the mountain divide. Because of this positioning, it is known as the absolute coldest place in Chile.
How cold does it get?
Well, in 2017, the temperature there dropped to negative 20 degrees Celsius.
Negative 20.
Yeah. And if you go further east to Rio Gallegos in Argentina, situated on the Atlantic coast, you don't just deal with the cold. You deal with the mechanical force of the wind.
Right, because there's nothing to stop it.
Exactly. Without any mountains left to block the air currents coming off the frozen south, the winds in Rio Gallegos routinely reach 100 kilometers per hour.
It's an environment that actively, continuously tests the limits of biological endurance. I mean, the wind strips the soil, the cold freezes the water, and the dry air parches the vegetation.
It sounds totally unlivable.
You'd think so. Which makes the creatures that managed to survive here and the very first human beings who eventually walked alongside them all the more remarkable.
Yeah, because the brutal, extreme landscape of the Pleistocene epoch wasn't an empty, frozen wasteland when humans finally showed up. It was practically crawling with monsters.
It really was. What we have to realize is that up until the end Pleistocene extinction event, which occurred roughly 10 to 12,000 years ago, Patagonia was a genuine land of giants.
But not the human ones.
No, not the human giants Magellan imagined, but mammalian megafauna. The ecosystem was capable of supporting animals of a scale that seems entirely fictional to us today.
Well, let's walk through this prehistoric menagerie because, honestly, if you transported a person back 15,000 years, they just would not believe their eyes.
They'd be terrified.
First, you had the Mylodon. This is a species of ground sloth, but forget the small, slow creatures hanging from trees today.
Right, completely different.
The Mylodon was the size of a cow. It weighed over 2,000 pounds, and it was covered in a thick, armored hide embedded with small, bony plates called osteoderms to protect it from predators.
An armored sloth.
Yes, and then you had the Macrauchenia.
Ah, the Macrauchenia is truly one of the strangest animals in the fossil record. When Charles Darwin first discovered its fossils during the voyage of the Beagle, He was completely baffled by it.
What did it look like?
It was a large ungulate, roughly the size of a camel, but it possessed a short, muscular trunk on his face, somewhat like a modern tapir, and it roamed the steppes in massive herds.
That is so weird. You also had native horses, the genus Epidian, running wild across the plains long before the Spanish ever brought European horses to the Americas.
Which is a detail a lot of people don't realize.
Yeah, but where there are massive herbivores, there are massive predators. And the predators of Pleistocene Patagonia were terrifying.
Oh, absolutely.
You had Arctotherium, the giant short-faced bear, which was significantly larger and faster than a modern grizzly. You had Smilodon, the iconic saber-toothed cat. And most remarkably, you had a unique subspecies of jaguar, Panthera oncomizumbrina.
Right, the Patagonian jaguar. What's fascinating here is that this jaguar was considerably larger and more heavily built than any jaguar alive today. It was an apex predator perfectly adapted to taking down heavily armored ground sloths and fast-moving native horses.
And here's the detail that absolutely haunts me. The giant sloths, the short-faced bears, the saber-tooth, they all died out roughly 10 to 12,000 years ago.
Right, the extinction event.
But those giant supersized jaguars, they survived.
They did.
They continued to inhabit the harsh southern reaches of Patagonia until the late 19th century. They were only extirpated, wiped out locally a little over 100 years ago.
It's incredible.
Imagine being a 19th century immigrant sheep farmer, just hammering in a modern wire fence on the steppe and realizing you are sharing the landscape with a surviving Pleistocene-era supersized jaguar.
It is a stunning bridge between deep time and modern history. It really is. But going back to that crucial end Pleistocene extinction window, that 10 to 12,000 year mark, that is exactly when we see the first definitive, undeniable evidence of human beings establishing themselves in Patagonia.
Right as the ice is melting.
Yes. As the climate warmed slightly and the massive megafauna began to fade, these early humans moved in, eventually leaving only the smaller, hardier survivor species that define the Patagonian ecosystem today.
Like the guanaco.
Exactly.
Oh.
The guanaco, which is a wild, agile relative of the llama, and the puma and the rhea, which is a large, flightless, ostrich-like bird.
So when did the very first people actually leave their footprints in this ice-scoured landscape?
The timeline is surprisingly early, and it constantly forces archaeologists to revise their theories about the peopling of the Americas.
Really? How early?
Well, at the Monteverde site in southern Chile, the evidence of human occupation dates back to around 14,500 years before present.
Whoa.
Yeah, roughly 12,500 BC. And on the eastern side of the Andes, on the Argentine steppe, archaeologists have uncovered ancient hearths, butchered animal bones, and stone scrapers dating to around 9,400 to 9,200 BC.
Put yourself in their shoes for a second. You are a prehistoric hunter-gatherer. You don't have woven textiles. You are relying entirely on the skins of the animals you kill.
Which is a tough existence.
Very. You are armed with what archaeologists call a fishtail projectile point, a meticulously knapped stone spear point. You are standing on a freezing plain, the wind is howling at 100 kilometers per hour, stripping the heat from your body, and you are facing down a 2,000-pound, heavily armored Mylodon ground sloth.
It's terrifying to even picture.
The sheer human grit, the profound psychological resilience required to survive in that environment is almost unimaginable.
And we know definitively that they actively hunted these giant beasts.
They didn't just hide from them.
No, not at all. At several archaeological sites across Patagonia, these specific fishtail points have been found embedded in or directly associated with the skeletal remains of extinct megafauna, like the Mylodon and the native Epidian horses.
They actually took them down.
They didn't just survive alongside the monsters, they preyed upon them. And beyond their hunting prowess, they left profound, deeply artistic marks on the landscape.
The cave art.
Yes. One of the most haunting locations on Earth is the Cueva de las Manos, or Cave of the Hands, in Santa Cruz, Argentina.
I have spent so much time looking at photographs of the site. It is beautiful, and it carries this heavy, almost eerie weight to it.
It is an ancient rock shelter at the foot of a cliff, heavily protected from the elements. And the walls are covered in hundreds of negative images of human hands. Yes. These early inhabitants would press their left hands flat against the rock face, take a hollow bone pipe, and blow a mixture of mineral pigments, reds, ochres, blacks, and whites over their hands.
Like a prehistoric airbrush.
Exactly. And when they pulled their hands away, the silhouette remained. These stenciled handprints date back to around 8,000 BC.
Amazing.
It is a literal, physical wave from deep time. It is humanity asserting, we are here, we exist in this extreme place.
That desire to mark their existence makes perfect sense when you consider how isolated some of these populations became. I mean, what about the people who lived in the far, far south? The groups that push all the way down into Tierra del Fuego.
The history of Tierra del Fuego introduces one of the most compelling intersections of indigenous mythology and global geological history that we have on record.
Okay, tell me about that.
The indigenous peoples of this extreme southern territory included several distinct groups, most notably the Selknam. Now, as you probably know, Tierra del Fuego is a massive archipelago today, separated from the South American mainland by the Strait of Magellan.
Right. It's an island now.
But the geological record clearly shows that during the early Holocene epoch, roughly 9,000 to 10,000 years ago, global sea levels were significantly lower, and Tierra del Fuego was physically connected to the mainland by a land bridge.
Right. It was an open peninsula before the massive glacial melts at the end of the Ice Age raised the oceans and basically flooded the lowlands.
Yes, and here is where it becomes extraordinary. The Selknam people maintained a rigorous, highly structured oral tradition. This was recorded much later in the late 19th and early 20th centuries by a Salesian missionary named Giuseppe Maria Beauvoir.
What did the tradition say?
According to the foundational myth of the Selknam, their ancestors originally arrived in what is now Tierra del Fuego by walking overland. They chased herds of guanaco into the deep south.
Walking across the land bridge.
Right. But when they eventually tried to return north to the warmer plains, they couldn't. They discovered that the sea had violently rushed in, flooding their crossing and permanently trapping them on the island.
Wait, think about the implications of that. Their oral history perfectly, flawlessly captured a 9,000-year-old geological climate event.
It's astounding.
The collective memory of the Holocene sea level rise survived for thousands of years, passed down through generations by word of mouth. It wasn't a myth to them. It was their literal historical record.
It is a profound testament to the resilience, the cultural continuity, and the absolute isolation of these first peoples. The Selknam, the Tehuelche, the Yagan, they developed incredibly complex, balanced societies perfectly adapted to one of the most hostile climates on the planet.
But that isolation, which had lasted for unbroken millennia, was destined to be shattered by the arrival of a completely alien worldview.
Which brings us back to the Europeans.
And the irony is that the Europeans who finally arrived didn't see these resilient, highly adapted human beings. They saw the monsters they brought with them in their own imagination. Yeah. We touched on the hook at the beginning, but we really need to dig into how this 250-year delusion about a race of giants actually functioned. Because Magellan's diary didn't just stay a private joke, it became accepted, peer-reviewed European science.
It really did. And the linguistic leap that triggered the myth is a fascinating study in misunderstanding.
How did it start?
We rely primarily on the journals of Antonio Pigafetta. He was a Venetian scholar who served as the official chronicler of Magellan's 1520 expedition. When they encountered the local inhabitants, who were almost certainly the Iconicank, a group of the Tehuelche people, Magellan dubbed them the Patagonians.
Right. And for a very long time, popular history books and school teachers claimed that Patagonia simply meant land of the big feet, deriving from the Spanish word pata, meaning foot.
Which is completely false.
Total myth.
It is highly questionable and largely dismissed by modern historians. As we establish, the term almost certainly derives from the dog-faced monster Patagon in Francisco Vasquez's 1512 chivalric romance novel, Primelian.
The fantasy book.
Exactly. When Magellan saw that Tehuelche, dressed in heavy guanaco skins, and observed them eating raw meat to survive the winter, it aligned perfectly with the uncivilized wild creature in his favorite book.
But there's also another theory, right?
Interestingly, yes, the famous travel writer Bruce Chatwin later suggested a more nuanced etymology. He proposed that the root of both the fictional monster's name and the region of Patagonia might come from the ancient Greek word patagos.
Patagos, which means what?
It translates to a roaring or gnashing of teeth. Pigafetta specifically described the locals in his journal as roaring like bulls when they spoke or shouted.
Okay, so Magellan makes a nerdy literary reference based on a fantasy novel and maybe throws in a Greek pun about roaring. How does a single diary entry mutate into 250 years of global scientific hysteria?
It mutated because of the extreme disparity in the physical heights of the two populations. Pigafetta explicitly claimed in his reports that the local people were of such immense stature that the tallest Spanish sailors only reached up to their waists.
That's a huge difference.
He estimated, in writing, that the Patagonians were 9 to 12 feet tall.
But why would he lie like that? Or did he really believe it?
To understand why he would make such a wild claim, you have to remember the biological reality of Europe at the time.
The sailors were tiny.
Exactly. The average height of a 16th century adult European male, especially a peasant or a sailor, subjected to childhood malnutrition, disease, and the ravages of scurvy on a long voyage. I mean, it was just over 5 feet, about 1.55 meters.
Right. You are dealing with exhausted, stunted men, and then a Tehuelche hunter approaches them.
Who was very healthy.
Yeah, the Tehuelche had a protein-rich diet of guanaco meat and weren't living in disease-ridden European cities. So to these tiny, scurvy-ridden sailors, a healthy, tall man wrapped in bulky animal furs genuinely looks like a titan.
Yes, and human psychological exaggeration did the rest. When Pigafetta's accounts were published and circulated throughout Europe, this alleged race of giants entered the common perception as a verified fact.
They just accepted it.
They did. The mystery of the unknown South allowed people to project their wildest fears and fantasies onto the map. Early cartographers literally started labeling the entire Patagonian region as Regio Gigantum, the region of the giants.
That is wild.
It permeated pop culture, too. Even William Shakespeare was aware of the myth. By 1611, the Patagonian god Setebos, which Pigafetta had phonetically transcribed as Seteaboth, was heavily referenced as a demonic figure in Shakespeare's play The Tempest.
It's just wild that this mass delusion lasted so long, and it didn't even peak in the 1500s. The height of the giant mania happened during the Enlightenment, the so-called Age of Reason.
It is a supreme irony. In 1767, the frenzy was sensationally reignited across Europe. An anonymous but supposedly official account was published detailing Commodore John Byron's global circumnavigation in the British Royal Navy vessel, HMS Dolphin.
The Dolphin, yeah.
This rogue publication explicitly claimed to provide positive modern proof that the 9 to 12-foot Patagonian giants were absolutely real.
And it becomes an overnight smash hit bestseller. People are rushing to buy thousands of copies. Unscrupulous publishers are reprinting older, unrelated exploration accounts that didn't even mention giants in the first place, just hurriedly inserting paragraphs about monsters to cash in on the giant mania.
Fake news.
Exactly. It was the 18th century equivalent of algorithmic clickbait.
It absolutely was.
Yeah.
The public demanded giants, and the publishing industry supplied them. But the definitive reality check finally arrived a few years later in 1773.
Someone finally brought a tape measure.
Essentially, yes. An English writer named John Hawkesworth was commissioned by the British Admiralty to publish a massive official compendium of Southern Hemisphere explorers' journals. He was given access to the actual unedited official logs of Captain James Cook and Commodore John Byron.
The real logs.
Right. And when you bypass the sensationalized anonymous bestseller and read the actual sober daily military logs, the mundane truth finally comes out.
The suspense is over. What were the actual measurements recorded by the Royal Navy?
The official logs recorded that the Tehuelche people Byron's expedition encountered were indeed very tall, especially for the era. But they were not monsters. They averaged around 6 foot 6 inches.
Or 1.98 meters, which is incredibly tall.
It is.
If you are a 5-foot-tall sailor and a 6-foot-6 man wrapped in heavy furs is shouting at you in a language you don't understand, he is going to seem like a mythical giant. The fear scales up the perception.
Precisely the mechanics of the myth. They were simply a remarkably tall, robust, and healthy human population.
So that killed the myth.
Mostly. Once Hawkesworth published the true empirical measurements, the scientific frenzy died down. Though the myth of the Patagonian giants stubbornly persisted in some obscure corners of literature and folklore, even into the early 20th century.
The tragedy is that while European readers were obsessed with fictional giants in Patagonia, the actual indigenous populations were about to face very real human threats.
The colonial expansion. Yeah. Once the myth of the monsters faded, the real historical battle for physical control of this region began. And this leads us into a period of total chaos, where outlaws, indigenous nations, and expanding empires just collided. Let's look at the 18th and 19th centuries, because Patagonia basically became the ultimate ungoverned Wild West of South America. From a geopolitical standpoint, the Spanish crown had formally claimed absolute sovereignty over Patagonia very early on, right after Magellan's voyage.
But they didn't really do anything with it.
No, they didn't. After the Spanish discovered the treacherous but navigable sea route around Cape Horn, they largely lost interest in actively developing or settling the deep south. It was too cold, too remote, and seemingly lacked the gold and silver of Peru.
So they just left it alone.
Well, not exactly. The Spanish authorities were intensely, almost pathologically paranoid about rival European powers using the vast empty coastline against them. They were specifically terrified of British privateers and pirates, like Sir Francis Drake and Sir John Narborough.
Because these British pirates were using the hidden bays and fjords of Patagonia to repair their ships, resupply, and launch devastating raids against Spanish treasure galleons further north.
Exactly.
And Spain's solution to this pirate problem was incredibly drastic.
It was an extreme, merciless, scorched earth policy. The Spanish authorities reasoned that the British pirates were only able to survive in the Deep South because they could trade with or steal from the local indigenous populations for food and fresh water.
Right, they needed the locals to survive.
So to deprive these pirates of any eventual support or resources, the Spanish ordered the literal forced depopulation of the Guayticas archipelago in western Patagonia.
They just cleared everyone out.
They violently, forcefully transferred the majority of the indigenous Chono population hundreds of miles north to the Chiloé archipelago, where they could be controlled and assimilated.
They just emptied an entire archipelago of its native inhabitants so the British pirates wouldn't have anyone to buy a fish from. I mean, it is a staggering use of state power.
It effectively depopulated huge swaths of the territory in the 18th century. But as the 19th century dawned, Spain was hit with much bigger problems than pirates.
The revolutions.
Right. The Spanish-American Wars of Independence were raging across the continent. And as the Patriot armies in Chile and the United Provinces, which would eventually become modern Argentina, fought brutal campaigns to break away from Spanish rule, the massive, ungoverned expanse of Patagonia became a refuge.
A place to hide.
It became a sanctuary for the losers of the wars, for outlaws, deserters, and die-hard royalists who refused to accept the new republics.
Which gives us one of the wildest, most cinematic gangs in human history. The Pinchera brothers.
Oh, the Pinchera brothers are a fascinating anomaly.
Who are they?
They began as the last organized royalist armed group fighting for the Spanish king in what is today Argentina and Chile. When the Patriot forces finally consolidated control over central Chile, the brothers didn't surrender.
They ran south.
Instead, they moved their entire military operation across the Andes Mountains, deep into the ungoverned interior of northern Patagonia.
And they weren't just a small ragtag band of highwaymen hiding in a cave. They built a massive, functioning outlaw republic.
It was a huge operation.
Look at the logistics of their operation. The gang was a massive coalition made up of European Spanish loyalists, American Spanish, mestizos, and crucially allied indigenous tribes, specifically the Rancheles and the Barahuanos.
They had numbers.
Yeah, they set up massive permanent fortified encampments deep in the Patagonian interior, completely out of reach of the newly formed struggling governments in Santiago and Buenos Aires. They had a hierarchy, they had logistics, they had an economy based entirely on plunder.
From these hidden, highly defensible bases, the Pincheras launched numerous, devastating, coordinated military raids into the settled countryside of both the Chilean and Argentine republics. They terrorized the borderlands for years.
Just untouchable.
But it is important to understand that the Pincheras were just one violent symptom of a much more massive demographic and cultural shift happening in Patagonia at the exact same time. A historical process known as the Aracanization of Patagonia.
Let's define the mechanics of Aracanization, because it is the fundamental turning point that shapes the modern borders of South America. How did one group come to dominate such a massive territory?
So, towards the end of the 16th century, Mapuche-speaking agriculturalists began moving from their ancestral homelands in the western Andes, in what is now Chile eastward, into the vast plains of Argentine Patagonia.
Crossing the mountains.
Yes. And they didn't achieve dominance purely through overwhelming numbers, but through a brilliant combination of cultural confrontation and rapid technological adaptation. The Mapuche were incredibly adept at adopting the tools of their enemies. Most notably, they mastered the use of the horse, which the Spanish had introduced.
So they transitioned from being mountain agriculturalists to becoming a highly mobile, incredibly effective light cavalry on the open plains.
Yes. By the early 19th century, this Aracanization process intensified dramatically. Many Mapuche and related groups migrated deep into Patagonia to live a nomadic lifestyle, raising massive herds of cattle and sheep.
But they also used the horses for war.
They utilized their horsemanship to launch massive, highly organized military incursions into the wealthy Argentine countryside.
These raids were called Malones, and the sheer logistical scale of these Malones is mind-boggling. They weren't just stealing a few cows in the night.
Oh no, it was industrial scale.
The Mapuche cavalry would strike deep into Argentina, overwhelm local defenses, and steal hundreds of thousands of cattle at a time.
Hundreds of thousands.
Yeah. They would then drive these massive stolen herds hundreds of kilometers across the dry pampas, navigate them up through the freezing mountain passes of the Andes, along a heavily guarded route known as the Camino de los Chilenos, or the Chilean Road,
Right.
and drive them down into Chile to trade them for manufactured goods, weapons, and especially alcoholic beverages.
It was a highly lucrative international rustling economy operating entirely outside the control of the nation-states.
A shadow economy.
The indigenous leaders, known as Loncos, became incredibly powerful geopolitical players. The historical sources document one specific Lonco named Calfucurá. Around 1830, he crossed the Andes from Chile to the Argentine Pampas. He built a massive coalition of tribes. And in 1859, Calfucurá felt powerful enough to straight up attack the major Argentine city of Bahia Blanca with an organized army of 3,000 mounted warriors.
Think about the political nightmare this creates for the young nations of South America. You have the fragile republics of Argentina and Chile trying to establish themselves. And right in the middle, acting as a massive, unconquered buffer state, you have a highly mobile, militarily powerful indigenous nation.
Sitting right on their borders.
And this nation is actively raiding Argentina to fuel the economy of Chile.
This raises an important question. The situation was fundamentally unsustainable for the nation-states. How long could Buenos Aires tolerate an independent power operating within its claimed borders, devastating its agricultural economy?
Not very long.
The answer was not much longer. And that intolerable geopolitical tension leads directly into one of the darkest, most brutal, and most consequential turning points in South American history: the state-sponsored pacification of Patagonia and the permanent drawing of the borders.
In the mid-19th century, the era of outlaws and independent indigenous nations comes to a violent end. Both Argentina and Chile begin an aggressive, militarized phase of expansion into the south. They realize that if they don't physically occupy Patagonia, someone else will.
On the Chilean side, the expansion began strategically. President Manuel Bulnes sent a naval expedition to the Deep South to secure the Strait of Magellan. They officially founded the settlement of Punta Arenas in 1848.
Locking down the sea route.
Right. This is a direct move to cement Chile's sovereign claim over the most crucial maritime waterway in the world at the time. But on the Argentine side, the situation wasn't just about territorial ambition. It was viewed as an immediate existential threat to the survival of the state.
Because Argentina was terrified of the economic and cultural ties between the Arakanized tribes and the nation of Chile.
Exactly.
The Argentine government looked at the map and feared that if a war broke out between Argentina and Chile, these powerful indigenous armies in Patagonia would ally with Chile. A war over the southern territory could be brought right to the doorstep of Buenos Aires.
The catalyst that forced Argentina's definitive military response was a massive, unprecedented indigenous raid in 1872.
The big one.
The powerful Lonco Calfucurá, also known as Calfucurá, marshaled an army of 6,000 native followers and launched a coordinated attack on several major Argentine cities in the province of Buenos Aires.
6,000 warriors.
The devastation was immense. 300 Argentine criollos were killed in the fighting, and the raiders successfully captured and drove off an astonishing 200,000 heads of cattle.
The logistics of stealing and moving 200,000 cattle across an open plain while being pursued by a national army is just staggering. But it was the final straw.
It was.
In the 1870s, the Argentine government responds with overwhelming force. And as we discuss this, we are relying strictly on the historical documentation to impartially outline the events. The Argentine state launched a highly controversial, industrialized military campaign known as the Conquest of the Desert.
The campaign was masterminded and executed primarily by General Julio Argentino Roca. The stated goal of the Argentine government, as documented in their own historical archives, was to permanently subdue, or as many critical historians argue, exterminate the native peoples of the South.
To clear the land.
Thereby extending the absolute power of the Argentine state firmly across the entirety of eastern Patagonia.
This wasn't a colonial skirmish. This was a modern, industrialized army utilizing telegraph lines for coordinated movement and repeating Remington rifles against indigenous cavalry armed primarily with lances and older firearms.
It was completely asymmetrical.
The campaign systematically crushed the indigenous resistance, permanently altering the demographics and the power structure of the continent. And with the native population displaced, killed, or forced into marginal reservations, the governments of Argentina and Chile finally sat down to carve up the map.
This geopolitical negotiation resulted in the Boundary Treaty of 1881. The formal border between the two nations was established, with the negotiations heavily mediated by the British Crown, who, of course, had immense financial interests in the region's stability.
Naturally, where did they draw the line?
The treaty legally split Patagonia down the highest peaks of the Andes Mountains. This agreement granted approximately 90% of the Patagonian landmass to Argentina, giving them the vast eastern steppes, and roughly 10% to Chile, granting them the complex mountainous western fjords.
But drawing a neat line on a map in an office in Buenos Aires or Santiago always has a messy, tragic human cost on the ground.
Always.
The demographic shifts that followed the treaty were brutal. You had this large population of Chilean manual laborers, natives of the Chiloé archipelago known as Chilotes.
Right.
For decades, they had formed the backbone of the workforce on the massive livestock farms, the estancias, operating in what was now legally Argentine territory.
Before, and especially after, further border clarifications in 1902, the Argentine government grew increasingly paranoid about having a large, culturally distinct Chilean population living and working within its newly secured, highly sensitive border regions.
Nationalism flares up.
Driven by nationalism and security fears, Argentine authorities initiated policies that effectively expelled thousands of these Chilote workers from their territory.
And these newly displaced, desperate workers are forced out of the Argentine steppe and pushed back across the freezing Andes Mountains into the Chilean side, specifically into what is now the Aysén region.
It was a brutal migration.
They crossed the mountains and founded a settlement called Balmaceda. But remember the climate reality we discussed earlier. The Chilean side of the Andes is covered in dense, incredibly wet, ancient, temperate rainforests. It completely lacks the open, natural grasslands of the Argentine steppe.
So what do these desperate immigrants do to survive?
They need pasture for their animals, so they start fires.
Oh, wow.
They burn down the ancient forests to artificially create grazing land.
The resulting environmental devastation was catastrophic and irreversible. The historical record notes that the massive fires set by these desperate immigrants to clear the dense, wet wood were so intense and difficult to control that some continuous blazes lasted for more than 2 years.
2 years of just fire.
It radically, permanently altered the physical landscape and the ecology of southern Chile.
It is a profound tragedy born out of geopolitical paranoia. But while that painful displacement is happening in the Andes, the rest of Patagonia is simultaneously becoming a magnet for some of the most highly unusual, specific waves of European immigration in history.
It became a real melting pot.
Yeah, you have Romanian adventurers like Julius Popper leading a ruthless gold rush down in Tierra del Fuego in 1885. You have a massive, sudden influx of Croatian immigrants fleeing the Austro-Hungarian Empire to settle in the Deep South. And then there is the incredible story of Project Hiraeth.
Project Hiraeth is a truly unique, almost utopian chapter in the history of global migration. It involved a large group of Welsh settlers arriving on the arid coast of the Chubut Valley in Argentina in 1865.
Why Wales?
Well, they weren't just poor immigrants looking for a plot of farmland. They were ideological refugees. They were actively fleeing the aggressive cultural assimilation of the English state back in Great Britain.
Ah, they wanted to keep their language.
Yes, they traveled to the end of the earth specifically to create an isolated utopian colony where they could protect and preserve their distinct Welsh culture, religion, and language.
They intentionally chose a harsh, empty environment because they wanted to be left alone.
Exactly.
They voted to keep their culture entirely separate from the Spanish-speaking society around them. They established a thriving settlement with their own Welsh language schools, their own traditions, flags, and anthems. And the craziest part is that they succeeded.
They really did.
To this day, you can go to towns like Gaiman or Trelew in Patagonia, sit in a tea house, drink traditional Welsh tea, eat black cake, and listen to the locals speak a localized, evolved dialect of Welsh called Camley.
It perfectly highlights the paradox of the region. Once Patagonia was violently forcefully integrated into the global state system via the conquest of the desert, it immediately morphed into a complex patchwork. You had displaced indigenous peoples, ambitious utopian immigrants, and rapid, aggressive resource extraction.
Oh, resource.
Which provides the perfect bridge into our final historical era. The blood spilled to secure this land in the 19th century was ultimately about controlling its vast natural resources, setting the stage for the massive economic engine of modern Patagonia.
Which brings us to the present day, from sheep to shale. You know, when you think of Patagonia today, if you aren't immediately picturing the logo on a fleece jacket, you're probably picturing a lone sheep on a windswept plain.
And that image is historically accurate. The late 19th century, immediately following the military campaigns, brought a massive, highly organized sheep farming boom to the region.
Where did the sheep come from?
Wealthy landowners imported hardy sheep breeds from the British-controlled Falkland Islands into the lands around the Strait of Magellan in the 1860s. The industry exploded.
It's still huge today.
Today, about half of Argentina's total national flock of roughly 15 million sheep are located in Patagonia, primarily consisting of the rugged Merino and Corriedale breeds that can survive the harsh winters and sparse vegetation.
But the sheep are just the surface layer of the wealth. Beneath the shingle and the steppe, Patagonia is a global energy powerhouse.
The oil.
Yeah. The industrialization of the region began in earnest when oil was discovered completely by accident by a crew drilling for water near the coastal city of Comodoro Rivadavia in 1907.
Drilling for water, finding oil. The classic story.
Right. And today, the energy sector is defined by the Vaca Muerta formation in the Neuquén Basin.
Vaca Muerta, which translates literally to dead cow. It is a geological formation of late Jurassic to early Cretaceous age. It is a massive deposit of shale rock deeply saturated with oil and natural gas.
So they use fracing to get it out.
Through the modern, highly controversial application of hydraulic fracturing or fracing, where millions of gallons of water, sand, and chemicals are injected at extreme high pressure deep underground to crack the rock and release the hydrocarbons, Vaca Muerta has become the world's largest producing shale oil field entirely outside of North America.
It is an absolute industrial behemoth, and it's not just fossil fuels. The massive rivers flowing off the Andes power enormous hydroelectric dams on the Limay River.
And the wind.
Yes, those notorious, punishing 100-kilometer-per-hour winds we talked about earlier, they have been harnessed, making Patagonia the primary source of modern wind power for the Argentine electrical grid. It is the engine room of the southern cone.
Here's where it gets really interesting. There is a deep psychological disconnect in how the region operates versus how it is sold to the world. Because the way the global public views Patagonia today isn't as an industrial oil field, a massive dam project, or a heavily overgrazed sheep pasture.
No, not at all.
We view it as a pristine, untouched, deeply spiritual tourist utopia.
The rebranding is incredible. We don't see the fracing rigs. We see the awe-inspiring, thunderous collapse of ice off the Perito Moreno Glacier. We see the charming, alpine-style chocolate shops in the ski resort town of Bariloche. We see the majestic southern right whales breaching off the Valdez Peninsula.
Tourism has deliberately become an ever more important part of the regional economy since the second half of the 20th century. National parks were established, infrastructure was built, and the narrative of Patagonia was shifted. It went from a harsh frontier to be conquered to a fragile wilderness to be preserved.
But this successful rebranding of Patagonia into a premium nature destination has inadvertently triggered a brand new, highly controversial wave of modern colonization.
The billionaires.
The billionaire land grab. This aspect of modern Patagonia is wild, and it ties everything we've talked about together. Vast, unbelievable tracts of Patagonian land are now being bought up by incredibly wealthy foreign individuals and multinational corporations.
And they aren't buying it primarily to raise sheep or drill for oil. They're buying it as the ultimate prestige purchase.
Like who?
You have celebrities and tycoons like Sylvester Stallone and media mogul Ted Turner purchasing enormous, sprawling private estates. You had the late American businessman and conservationist Douglas Tompkins buying millions of acres to create huge private conservation areas like Pumalin Park.
So some of it is for conservation.
While Tompkins' motivations were driven by deep ecology and a genuine desire to create national parks, the sheer scale of foreign land ownership creates massive unease regarding national sovereignty. But the most notable and arguably the most controversial foreign landowner in Patagonia is the Italian multinational fashion corporation, the Benetton Group.
Benetton, the clothing company.
Yes. Through their local holding company, the Compañía de Tierra Sud Argentino, the Benetton Group acquired nearly 2.2 million acres of land, officially becoming Patagonia's largest private landowner.
2.2 million acres. That's absurd.
From a corporate perspective, they brought massive capital investment to the region. They heavily modernized the ailing, antiquated sheep-rearing industry to supply wool for their global fashion lines. However, Their immense, aggressively managed land holdings have sparked intense, ongoing, and sometimes violent clashes with the local inhabitants.
And when we look at who those local inhabitants are, the history loops back on itself perfectly. The primary conflict is with the local Mapuche communities. These are the direct descendants of the very people who were targeted, crushed, and displaced by General Roca's conquest of the desert in the 1870s.
Exactly the connection we need to make. Various Mapuche organizations assert deep ancestral rights to much of the land now legally held by Benetton. They argue that the land was illegally stolen from their ancestors by the Argentine state during the military campaigns, and therefore the modern corporate deeds are fundamentally invalid.
And this isn't just a theoretical debate.
No, the conflict is not theoretical. It is a very real, very physical legal battle. A prime example occurred in 2002 involving a Mapuche family, the Tehuelche family.
Let's outline the mechanics of that specific case because it illustrates the broader struggle perfectly.
The Tehuelche family occupied a plot of land called Santa Rosa. They argued it was their ancestral territory and had been abandoned. The Benetton group filed a legal claim asserting their absolute property rights based on their corporate deeds.
So what did the government do?
The Argentine state backed the corporate claim, and the Mapuche family was physically evicted by the police. However, this sparked a massive, highly publicized legal and public relations battle that drew international attention to the plight of the Mapuche. After a grueling 5-year struggle, facing immense pressure, the land was finally restored to the family in 2007.
Think about the mechanics of how this all connects. You can trace a direct, unbroken legal and historical line from the 19th century straight into the 21st.
It all stems from the same root.
Yeah. The 1870s conquest of the desert was driven by state paranoia and the desire for agricultural dominance. It physically, violently cleared the land of its indigenous inhabitants. But crucially, that state violence also laid the foundational property laws and the original land deeds.
The legal paperwork.
Right. Over a century later, those very same blood-soaked deeds allow European multinational corporations and American billionaires to legally purchase areas the size of small European countries. The tension over who actually owns Patagonia didn't end when the boundary treaty was signed in 1881. The battlefield just moved from the open steppe into the corporate courtroom.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it is a profound realization. The actors have changed from Spanish galleons and indigenous cavalry to Italian fashion executives and human rights lawyers, but the fundamental struggle to control, define, and exploit the Deep South remains exactly the same.
We have covered hundreds of millions of years of history today, from tectonic collisions to modern corporate law. Patagonia isn't just a label on a fleece jacket.
Definitely not.
It is a 250-million-year-old geological jigsaw puzzle, possibly drifting in from Antarctica on the Hornkel Fault. It is a graveyard for giant ground sloths and massive Pleistocene jaguars. It is a canvas for centuries of bizarre European myths about 12-foot dog-faced giants.
A rugged haven for royalist outlaws.
Exactly. And it remains a deeply scarred, contested frontier, still caught in a desperate tug-of-war between ancestral indigenous claims and the immense power of modern global capitalism. So, what does this all mean?
When you synthesize all of that, it leaves us with a profound and perhaps deeply unsettling thought to consider about the future. If you look at the trajectory of the 21st century, as the global climate continues to warm and resources become increasingly scarce, the wealthiest individuals and corporations on Earth are actively, aggressively buying up vast, remote, resource-rich, and climatically harsh regions like Patagonia.
They're buying up the empty spaces.
Yeah. What does that signal about the future of our global geography? Are places like Patagonia quietly transitioning in the global consciousness from being the end of the Earth, a harsh, terrifying frontier to be conquered, to the ultimate, heavily fortified climate havens for the global elite?
That is a fascinating, heavy question to leave you with. A place that a freezing, starving Ferdinand Magellan saw as a bleak wasteland full of literal monsters might quietly be becoming the most valuable, exclusive real estate of our future. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep exploring the hidden history beneath the map, ask the hard questions about who owns the ground beneath your feet, and maybe the next time you pick up a fantasy novel on a cold winter night, think very carefully about what you name the things outside your window.